You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news Monday, 24th of November 2014. Terror suspects to be moved out of big cities to prevent attacks after U-turn by Clegg. Child abuse cases are tip of the iceberg in sexual exploitation of young people, warns Theresa May. Nick Ferrari of the Express shows criminal negligence hides police failures. Le Pen forced to justify €9 million loan from Russian bank. IMNOKUFAR rants on about Band-Aid. Bubonic plague outbreak in Madagascar kills 40, says World Health Organization. South China Sea tensions rise as Chinese fishermen fined $102,000 each for poaching. Egyptian president says Egypt prepared to send troops to a future Palestinian state. Thought for the day, the great double standard. And finally, 2 for One Day Monday. UK news. Terror suspects will be moved out of big cities and put into external exile after a shock U-turn by Nick Clegg. The Deputy Prime Minister has agreed to reinstate the so-called power of relocation, which was scrapped in 2011 at the demand of his own Liberal Democrats. At one time, one senior party figure labelled the measure abhorrent, Stalinist and authoritarian. But the abolition of the power has been blamed for 2 terror suspects absconding and, at a time of huge concern over jihadis returning from Syria, Mr Clegg has struck a deal with the Tories to allow its return. Under legislation to be unveiled this week, the law will allow fanatics to be forcibly ordered to leave London, Birmingham, Manchester or other big cities to separate them from their extremist network. World at 8. Of course, one cannot bolt the stable door after the horse has gone, but it might have been better had we been more choosy about who and how many we let in over the previous years. Child abuse cases are a tip of the iceberg in sexual exploitation of young people, warns Theresa May. The cases of child abuse exposed so far are only the tip of the iceberg at the extent of sexual exploitation of young people, the Home Secretary Theresa May has warned. Ms May spoke of her dismay over the number of abusers who have been able to operate with impunity both in the past and today. She said it was impossible to assess whether the activities of a paedophile ring involving senior figures in public life were covered up in the 1980s, but insisted an independent inquiry into historical sex abuse would establish the full facts. It's not possible to say whether there was a cover-up. That is why I think it's so important we have the inquiry so we get at the truth, she told the Andrew Marr Show. There is a real issue here about how was it in the past, but continuing today, the very institutions of the state that should be protecting children were not doing so. Why was it these abuses were able to take place and nobody was brought to justice as a result of that? She added, we must, as a society, get to the truth of that, and because I think we've already seen revealed is the tip of the iceberg on this issue. World at 8. I've commented on this in my thought for today. The whole thing is endemic now in our society because the media put all sexual abuse together when in fact it should be split into different boxes, some new and some very old. Nick Ferrari of the Express shows criminal negligence hides police failures. Last week's report by HM Inspectorate of Constabulary, HMIC, showing that at nearly 1 million crimes had disappeared in the past year, render those promises as hollow as a not guilty plea from a burglar caught with the family silver. In an effort to meet targets, a number of chief constables have presided over a practice the report describes as manipulation, but what you and I know more realistically as fiddling. More than 800,000 or 1 in 5 of crimes reported to the police each year are not being recorded by officers. This is unacceptable. Successive governments have become obsessed with targets. They have been introduced in education, immigration, local government, and now they're talking about publishing surgeons' records too, detailing patients who die on the operating table. The only presumption there surely is that some surgeons do not try hard enough, or just do not care if their patients die. Of particular concern is the way sexual and violent crimes have been niftily erased by the police's inexcusably poor system. In the official government figures, the number of offences is shown as 3,700,000, but when you factor in HMIC's findings, that rockets to 4,500,000. Let's remember HMIC is not some weird pressure group or biased think tank picking up cash from one political side or the other. Rather, it is an unimpeachable organisation with data that cannot be disputed. Of particular concern is the way sexual and violent crimes have been niftily erased by the police's inexcusably poor systems, said the report. One 13-year-old girl who said she'd been raped was simultaneously ignored and persuaded to drop the charges. To spell it out, that means rapists and violent criminals are not investigated, so could be at large to strike again. There's British justice for you. World at 8. It's the CPS who are guilty of hate, ethnic and religious crimes. They ignore Muslim grooming, Eastern European and Far Eastern slavery and trafficking, bury the parliamentary abuse because it's so old but still going on, and prosecute rich white guys for crimes or gropings 50 years ago. You tell me that there's no bias. European news. Le Pen forced to justify €9 million loan from Russian bank. Marine Le Pen, the leader of France's cash-strapped far-right National Front, Front National, on Sunday justified her party's €9 million loan from a Russian bank, saying it was needed to beef up their war chest ahead of local elections, saying the French banks won't lend to us. The loan from Moscow-based First Czech Russian Bank, FCRB, was signed in September and was first revealed by French investigative website Mediapart on Saturday. In an interview with French daily Le Monde, Le Pen said her party had no choice but to go to a Russian bank for funds with the departmental elections coming up early next year. It's scandalous the French banks won't lend to us, she said, insisting that the fact that the bank is Russian had nothing to do with the party's choice of lender. We had thrown out hooks everywhere in Spain, Italy, the United States, Asia and Russia, and we signed with the first one who agreed, and we're very happy about it, she told Le Monde. The National Front's treasurer, Wallerin de Saint-Just, told French broadcaster France Info about the party's financial woes, confirming also the difficulties in securing funds from French banks. No bank wants to give us a cent, he said. I reached out to a large number of French and European banks and I got some replies, but they were always negative. The National Front's bank, Société Générale, said in November that it would no longer be lending any money to the political party. We have been looking for loans for some time to fund our election campaigns, but our bank, like most French and European lenders, categorically refuses to give the FN and FN candidates the slightest cent, Saint-Just said. In France, Le Pen, however, rejected claims from critics suggesting the move had political implications in the sense that the FN is trying to firm up its relationship with Vladimir Putin's Russia. Ridiculous, she said, adding, these insinuations are outrageous and offensive, that obtaining a loan would determine our international stance. We've held that pro-Russian line for a long time, she said. Le Pen doesn't hide her respect for the Russian leader and was quoted by Le Monde in September as saying she has a certain admiration for the man. He proposes a patriotic economic model radically different from what the Americans are imposing on us. I now hand you over to IMNOKUFAR, who talks today about Band-Aid.
Hi folks, it's IMNOKUFAR here, back to persecute you again. Today I'm going to talk about Band-Aid. And am I alone in silently hoping that Band-Aid 30 bombs? I mean, this ill-conceived work of charity makes me absolutely sick. And it's not even a new song. It's a rehash of the dreadful 1984 original, if you call it original. Probably the most grating charity single in history, with a few last-minute tweaks to the lyrics, because it's all the rage at the moment. We are the world. It is not. After a few listens, I don't much want to feed the world and stuff a ball gag into Bob Geldof's hectoring gob. The whole bloody thing starts to feel like it's a process where if you give money, you solve the problem, and sometimes giving the money creates another problem. It may well have escaped your notice, but in actual fact, this whole thing has been extremely lucrative for Mr. Geldof. After restyling himself as the saviour of Africa, Geldof re-released the entire back catalogue of the Boomtown Rats issued the complete anthology of his own career, fronted a 6-part BBC documentary series, Geldof in Africa, produced his own 10 Alps company, launched a book and DVD with the same title, re-released his 1986 autobiography, which I must buy, and attempted to resurrect his musical career with a British tour. What's more, according to the Australian Daily Telegraph, Geldof has been charging up to $100,000 to give speeches on the subject of, you guessed it, poverty, something that he doesn't seem to suffer from very much himself. I personally think the intervention of charities in Africa has overall inflicted immeasurably worse damage on the continent than imperialism ever did. Compare the Marshall Plan aid to that being given over the past 5 decades and ask, why isn't Africa at least self-sufficient? Combined with the horrendous population growth, corruption, and a very shaky rule of law, charities are doing their best to keep Africa impoverished. Well done. And it's not just about Band-Aid I'm going to talk as well. Have you noticed that every single time you switch on the telly nowadays, you get adverts for £2 a month? £2 a month for giraffes, £2 a month for tigers, £2 a month for children, £2 a month for Ebola, £2 a month to save the universe, £2 a month for ecology, £2 a month for ostriches, £2 a month, £2 a month and £2 a month. Bloody hell. Bloody hell, if we were all to give £2 a month to all these, there'd be some very rich people around. Mind you, there are already. I've made my New Year's resolution already. No money to charities. I don't care what they are. If I've got any money, I think I'll just give it to an organisation that actually tries to do something to help the people of this country, and that means whichever organisation Nick Griffin is going to lead when we finally got everything sorted out. I suggest you all do the same. Anyhow, they've gotten so desperate on the Band-Aid new single that they actually rang me up the other day and asked me if I'd sing on it. So I've got to go because I've got to go for some singing lessons, and believe me, I'll be back to persecute you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eric. Lovely. World news. Bubonic plague outbreak in Madagascar kills 40, says World Health Organization. An outbreak of plague in Madagascar has killed 40 people and infected almost 80 others, the World Health Organization has said. The HWO have warned of the danger of a rapid spread of the disease in the capital, Antananarivo. The situation is worsened by high levels of resistance amongst fleas to a leading insecticide, the WHO added. Humans usually develop the bubonic form of the plague after being bitten by an infected flea carried by rodents. If diagnosed early, bubonic plague can be treated with antibiotics. But 2% of the cases in Madagascar are the most dangerous phlegmatic form of the disease, which can spread person to person by coughing. The first known case in the outbreak was a man in Somahatamana village in the district of Soronomandidi, about 200 kilometres west of Antananarivo at the end of August. There have been 2 confirmed cases in the capital, including 1 death. There is now a risk of rapid spread of the disease due to the city's high population density and the weakness of the healthcare system, the WHO said. A task force has been activated to manage the outbreak. Last year, health experts warned that the island was facing a plague epidemic unless it slowed the spread of the disease. It said that inmates at Madagascar's rat-infested jails were particularly at risk. World at 8. Don't worry, Bob Geldof will do a record. We will send millions of pounds out of this country, plus our minute navy, to solve this problem and bring it back, like Ebola, to a truly weak and diverse society in the United Kingdom. South China Sea tensions rise as Chinese fishermen fined $102,000 each for poaching. International relations between China and neighbouring Asian countries are set to rise after a Philippine court fined 9 Chinese fishermen $102,000 each for poaching. I love it. The court said that the 9 people were caught with hundreds of sea turtles in a disputed shoal in the South China Sea, which led to the fishermen being arrested in May. However, 2 fishermen were sent home because they were under the age of 18. It was not immediately clear how the fishermen would find the funds to pay the fines, but they faced 6 months jail if they failed to pay up. Time already served, suggesting they could even be released. "We're merely imposing our laws," Foreign Secretary Albert Del Rosario told reporters. "We tried to look for ways to be lenient. I think they will credit whatever time has been served already." China protested against the arrests and does not recognise the trial, saying the 9 were detained in China's territorial waters. IHS Janes, and a leading defence publication, said on Friday satellite images show China is building an island on a reef elsewhere in the Spratlys large enough to accommodate what could be its first offshore airstrip in the South China Sea. Del Rosario said the military had been asked to investigate. The building work, if confirmed, would fly in the face of US calls for a freeze in provocative activity in the South China Sea, one of Asia's biggest security issues. Concern is growing about an escalation in disputes, even as claimants work to establish a code of conduct to resolve them. 2 Vietnamese frigates were due to arrive in the Philippines today on a goodwill visit, the first time Hanoi has sent warships to the archipelago. The incident could provoke another round of talks over the disputed territory within the Philippines' 200-mile exclusive economic zone, as China already claims almost all of the entire South China Sea. The ownership of the South China Sea has been fraught with territorial disputes between China, Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam and Taiwan. The area is estimated to be loaded with minerals and oils and gas deposits, as well as fruitful bounties of sea life. World at 8. Let loose the Chinese and very soon there'll be no fish or oil. Rather like the French and Spanish in our fishing waters, we just let them in and sit by, whilst our own fishing fleets were ruined and those left ground down by EU rules, which only helped the EU. Egyptian president says Egypt prepared to send troops to a future Palestinian state. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said in remarks published on Sunday that Egypt is prepared to send troops into a future Palestinian state to assist local police and guarantee Israel's security. In comments to Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera, el-Sisi said the troops would be stationed there temporarily to establish confidence. In a clarifying statement later, his office said the idea is a way to encourage Israel to accept a 2-state solution. The president said that Egypt, along with other Arab countries, is willing to make available the necessary conditions for the creation of a Palestinian state, the statement said. The last round of US-brokered peace talks collapsed in April. Since then, Israel fought a 50-day war against Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip and advanced plans to build hundreds of new homes in Jewish areas of East Jerusalem. Israel fears that Hamas would take control of the West Bank if it withdrew its forces. World at 8. I just have the greatest admiration for this guy, al-Sisi. He restores my faith in Islam. He is a progressive and good leader, and I wish we had him over here. Thought for the day, the Great Double Standard. I'm doing just a short thought today on the Great Double Standard that we in this country seem to have adopted with regard to rape and our young women. We sexualise our girl children with skimpy clothing and makeup, parade them around and expect them to have the minds of Vestal virgins when they reach a certain age. Actually, the Vestal virgins were the holy prostitutes, so scrap that one. There is a huge debacle in and around Parliament now on historic child abuse and a couple of probable murders, all truly terrible, especially if true, but most of the people concerned are now dead. And if you think that it has gone away, you're very wrong. This nasty form of getting one's rocks off has been around since man was made and grows with the advent of power, money and the sheer availability of young, fresh flesh. We make a great wailing of child marriages, but we, British, indulged that practice up to 1949 when we finally abolished marriages for the under-16s. It is still the norm in India, China, Arabia and parts of Africa, to say nothing of the slums of South America. It was for the rich a way of building bridges with other families and gaining armies and gold. For the poor it was a simple matter of getting rid of a mouth to feed and perhaps, if lucky, some money changed hands. It was also in many cultures a way of allowing a young girl to marry and have children within wedlock. knowing that at a certain time hormones would make themselves present. A fact to which the Christian Church has chosen to ignore for centuries, putting many young girls into nunneries to stifle any problems that might arise. The Continentals have always had the right to put young daughters in the marital care of older men. That way they're being looked after. They might not be happy, but as many an unmarried single mother can claim, there are many forms of unhappiness, and struggling along with no money and a child or children and no benefactor in sight is one long, hard graft. Nowadays we seem to deny our young girls any form of getting together. In the last 3 years clubs are now just for drugs and getting drunk, pubs and wine bars likewise. There are no tennis clubs, no young farmers, no real coffee bars or soda bars, no cinemas, and no over 16 membership drinking or country clubs. In short, no real social life at all in which to meet a guy from roughly the same cultural background as yourself. The web and thousands of miles had taken this away, and also our hatred of anything remotely similar to the 50s and 60s way of life. It is all now you are on your own. With the break-up of many middle-class families and the constant moving around of people from town to town, there are also very few routes which can be adhered to. So we have a moving, undereducated and overstimulated younger generation who think the best thing they can do is get out of the country. So the great double standard comes in. Historic child abuse has never gone away, and now the web has provided a great theatre for it, which is worth a great deal of money. White ethnic girls are encouraged to be independent and have careers at an age when in days of yore they would be thinking about marrying and producing children. Old-fashioned and boring may be, but which would you rather your daughter did? Found a guy and settled down, or racketed around with drugs and booze until she looked 20 years older and had lost the will to live? We have an entire generation dressed to kill who never go anywhere other than Benidorm for 2 weeks and might never marry or live with someone and have children. Now I know that not all Muslims are sexual predators, but their attitude to Christian sexual morals is very different from ours. They safely marry off their daughters at early ages, not necessarily child brides, and then proceed in many areas to make sure that their non-Muslim underage victims are strictly a family business. In ways which I will be pilloried for, can you blame them? We have millions of Muslims over here and communities border on one another. They see white girls with no ambition and keen to have boyfriends, cars, drugs and drink. They're doing what men do in times of war, rape and pillage. The message from the media is to look sexy, look available, but don't touch, and is the subliminal message from the old Christian Bible. It is a well-known fact that rape, taken for itself, is not a question of how gorgeous a woman looks, but the power that is involved in the domination of a small victim. So dress up, walk the streets and the pubs, but I guarantee you, you will not be touched. Unless you get into an unlicensed minicab, of course. There have always been rapists, and frankly, unless you're drugged or very drunk, and it is a gang rape, as Confucius say, woman with skirts up runs faster than man with trousers down. Now this doesn't mean I'm not sympathetic to rape victims. If indeed they truly are, I am. But nowadays it is rather like the hysterical outbursts over Diana's death, and the word rape brings out the worst in people as we've all jumped on the double standards bandwagon. There is nothing wrong with arranged marriages in general so long as the girl and the boy have some say in it. We need to step up to the mark in bringing our young girls some form of discipline and help. Some things cannot be left to children, and the establishment are only too happy to take on girls who they deem as vulnerable. Parents need to be stricter and less open to advertising and TV. Girls should remain young as long as they can, because once over that certain wonderful age, they have more to lose than just their looks. I'm not suggesting for a minute that arranged marriages or nunneries should be reintroduced into our culture simply to make our young girls happier with being married off, but a change in the way we have tried to alter the status quo of what is still basically a Judeo-Christian culture regarding young women and make them into US teen film star clones and sex objects has not had the results wanted by the establishment. Or an even nastier thought, has it? And finally, 2 for One Day Monday. I've torn out my alarm system and deregistered from the neighbourhood watch. I've got a Pakistani flag in one corner in my front garden, a Hezbollah flag in the other, and the black flag of ISIS in the centre. The local police, our MI6, MI5, plus the Yanks Homeland Security and the other intelligence services are all watching my house 24/7. I've never felt safer. and the Irish blonde. An attractive blonde from Cork arrived at the casino. She seemed a little intoxicated and bet $20,000 in the single roll of the dice. She said, "I hope you don't mind, but I feel much luckier when I'm completely nude." With that she stripped from the neck down, rolled the dice and in her Irish brogue yelled, "Come on baby, mama needs new clothes." As the dice came to a stop she jumped down and squealed, "Yes, yes, I won, I won." She hugged each of the dealers, picked up her winnings and clothes and quickly departed. The dealers stared at each other dumbfounded. Finally one of them asked, "What did she roll?" The other answered, "I don't know, I thought you were watching." Moral of the story: not all Irish are drunks, not all blondes are dumb, but all men are men. You've been listening to The World at 8. I'm Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news Monday, 24th of November 2014. Terror suspects will be moved out of big cities to prevent attacks after U-turn by abhorrent, Stalinist and authoritarian. But the abolition of the power has been blamed for 2 terror suspects absconding and, at a time of huge concern over jihadis returning from Syria, Mr Clegg has struck a deal with the Tories to allow its return. Under legislation to be unveiled this week, the law will allow fanatics to be forcibly ordered to leave London, Birmingham, Manchester or other big cities to separate them from their extremist network. World at 8. Of course one cannot bolt the stable door after the horse has gone, but it might have been better had we Clegg. Child abuse cases are tip of the iceberg in sexual exploitation of young people, warns Theresa May. Nick Ferrari of the Express shows criminal negligence hides police failures. Le Pen forced to justify €9 million loan from Russian bank. IMNOKUFAR rants on about Band-Aid. Bubonic plague outbreak in Madagascar kills 40, says World Health Organization. South China Sea tensions rise as Chinese fishermen fined $102,000 each for poaching. Egyptian president says Egypt prepared to send troops to a future Palestinian state. Thought for the day, the great double standard. And finally, 2 for One Day Monday. UK news. Terror suspects will be moved out of big cities and put into external exile after a shock U-turn by Nick Clegg. The Deputy Prime Minister has agreed to reinstate the so-called power of relocation, which was scrapped in 2011 at the demand of his own Liberal Democrats. At one time, one senior party figure labelled the measure being more choosy about who and how many we let in over the previous years. Child abuse cases are a tip of the iceberg in sexual exploitation of young people, warns Theresa May. The cases of child abuse exposed so far are only the tip of the iceberg at the extent of sexual exploitation of young people, the Home Secretary Theresa May has warned. Ms May spoke of her dismay over the number of abusers who have been able to operate with impunity both in the past and today. She said it was impossible to assess whether the activities of